Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Dennis Small from Executive Intelligence Review. Today is October 24th, and I have the pleasure of having with me for a discussion Professor Pino Arlacchi. He was the Executive Director of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the well-known UNODC, from 1997 to 2002. Prior to that, in the 1990s, he was a member of parliament in Italy, was part of the Anti-Mafia Commission, is an expert on the subject of uh, fighting drugs, stopping the drug trade. From 2009 to 2014, he was a member of the European Parliament. And in 2010, he was the rapporteur for the European Parliament on the subject of Afghanistan. And this is a matter of great relevance to what we want to discuss today. Today, he is a full professor of sociology at the University of Sassari, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Welcome, Professor Arlacchi.
Happy to be here and talk about the usual issues that are still, unfortunately, very hot.
Unfortunately, indeed, I just saw a report this morning that yesterday, according to press accounts, there were two B-1B bombers of the United States flying from Texas that flew within 50 miles of the Venezuelan coast to the east of Caracas. This was about a week after there were three B-52s that flew over the Caribbean north of Caracas. In addition to this flexing of muscles, President Trump yesterday said that he perhaps will talk to the Senate, but no, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're going to kill people that are bringing drugs to our country. Okay, we're going to kill them, they're going to be like dead. And then he said, after these maritime operations, the land is going to be next. Incidentally, those maritime operations, as of this morning, are 9 strikes, 9 boats sunk, presumably with drugs on them, but there's no absolute proof of that. 37 people dead. What is your reading of this, and what is your perspective on how this drug problem should be actually addressed, Professor Arlacchi?
Well, I am simply shocked by this behavior that shows a total disrespect of international law and basic rules of international community, and also the strategy to fight narcotics. No state applies death penalty for the narcotic trade, consumption, trafficking, and all the rest. It's just Mr. Trump decided that. First. Second, is clearly evident that the issue of narcotics is not at stake in these operations. It's very evident that at stakes in the case of Venezuela is the issue of dominate Venezuela because of its oil. So Mr. Trump is applying a strategy of colonizing, submitting this country, because this country has a government that does not allow its resources, national resources, to be exploited from other countries. The oil industry of Venezuela belongs to the government, so it's clear that they want the United States wants to have a stake or completely own the oil industry through force, violence, and through a kind of regime change done by people, Venezuela, agents of the United States that are trying to overthrow Maduro government.
Yes, I think this regime change aspect is quite evident, and perhaps the naming of the Nobel Peace Prize for this year, Maria Corina Machado of Venezuela, was perhaps intended to encourage that process, since she very much supports the Trump policy for the region. I would venture to add that in addition to the oil matter, Trump has been unfortunately very explicit in his attacks on the role of the BRICS and the role of China and its economic role in helping Ibero-America develop. And perhaps that's also an aspect of targeting any country that wants to work with anybody other than Wall Street and the City of London. Would you say that that's a factor as well?
Yes, I mean, I read the issue through an internal issue in the United States, which is the clash between Trump and the so-called deep state. Deep state is strongly against the use of force against Venezuela. It already under Biden opposed the idea of overthrowing the government of Maduro through Mr. Guaido. Because of a very clear evaluation, it was clearly crazy to do this operation with a person like Guaido and with a strategy like the one Guaido did and failed. This Machado story is a repetition of Guaido issue, with the addition that in this case, the clear goal is to have Maduro destroyed, and the issue of oil is very clear. The most important point of Mrs. Machado plan is to privatize Venezuelan oil industry, and of course giving this industry to the American oil companies. This strategy will fail as Guaido's attempt failed, for clear reason. The only way to put Maduro aside is to invade Venezuela. And Trump is not going to invade Venezuela because deep state is deeply against that. He's trying anyway to do provocations, to do this attempt to overthrow Maduro through these land interventions against narcotics. And I believe it will not succeed, because the most important element is that Venezuelan people are reacting in an extremely strong way. And this is very known to intelligence agencies, right, and to everybody. Trump action is strengthening Maduro's appeal to the population. There is now a popular militia. There are 8 million people mobilized. I was there recently and I saw them.
Yes.
8 million people that do regular exercise every week in order to counter a possible attack to Venezuela in the form of invasion or in the form of a kind of team of people who will land in Venezuela trying to get rid of Maduro. So with an opposition like this, with a mobilization like this, is impossible to conduct a successful golpe operation. Government Venezuela is staying very calm in its reaction. They never arrested Machado, like they did not arrest Guaido, even if their violations are clearly would deserve in any democratic state, or even not democratic, a strong reaction, because it's a subversion, it's an open subversion. You cannot, like Mrs. Machado does every day, say, ask for an armed foreign intervention in your own country.
Yeah, right.
You cannot organize golpe and assassination of the president of your country. You cannot pursue this clear strategy on behalf of a foreign power. Just to give you an example, a few years ago in Europe, there was a movement and a party in Spain that pursued the independence of Catalonia, a Spanish region, from the central government. It was a movement entirely political, entirely peaceful, that got very big support by almost 90% of the Catalonia population through a referendum. The reaction of the central state of Spain to this movement was to arrest the heads of the movement and to use violence, repressing peaceful demonstration, in order to just cancel the political effect of the movement. This is Spain is not a dictatorship. Spain is a fully democratic state. And the way they reacted is an example of the way almost every European country would react to a similar political attack.
Right. Yeah.
This is the way, just to give you the proportion of what Mrs. Machado is doing. My opinion is a paradox, is that the government is letting her hide, knowing exactly where she is, because the perception is that she, at the end of the story, would help the government to get more consensus in the population, in a moment in which there is a huge consensus behind the government. So all these actions by Machado, Trump, and so on, at the end of the story, are strengthening the current government of Venezuela.
I would like to add also that the Maduro government in Venezuela has been fairly insightful in warning President Trump to not make this mistake, because it could be the policies of Marco Rubio that are just going to bloody the hands of Trump. So they are wisely, in my view, looking at the differences of especially the neocon crowd that for a long time, like around Guaido, were going for this. One of those, John Bolton, is now facing some legal difficulties of his own, but we'll leave that discussion for another time. I am aware that you were in Venezuela recently, Professor Arlacchi, and one of the things that you said there, among the many, which, or in articles afterwards, which I wanted to raise with you, is you said the whole idea of the Cartel de los Soles, which purportedly Maduro is part of, is a total myth. You said the 2025 UNODC report, again for our viewers, the UNODC is the body which Professor Arlacchi headed for many years. But the latest report is crystal clear and should embarrass those who have demonized Venezuela through rhetoric. The report only briefly mentions Venezuela, stating that a small amount of Colombian drug production passes through the country en route to the United States and Europe. And then you specify only 5% of Colombian drugs transit through Venezuela. Colombia produces over 70% of the world's cocaine. Peru and Bolivia cover most of the remaining 30%. Now, I'm going to put a map on the screen for our viewers, which is a map which Executive Intelligence Review produced or reprinted a number of years ago as part of a study on the drug trade, which we did. And I'm going to ask you to comment on it. The data which I'm showing you here actually only go to 2019, which was the last time we completed the study, about 5 years ago. I dare say that this trend is continuing. We viewed Dope Inc., as we called it, the world drug cartel, centered in financial interests, as $1.5 quadrillion dollars, trillion dollars worth in potential street volume of sales, rising rapidly. This is the trend of cocaine, and our numbers in 2019 match exactly what you said about the preponderant role of Colombia today. Not surprising, since the studies that we did used statistics from the UNODC and from the major United States report, which is the INCSR, the International Narcotics Control
Yeah.
Strategy Report, which match fairly closely, but we checked one against the other. But here's the map I wanted to show our viewers and to ask you about. Again, this is from 2019, but at the time it does show that 74% of the cocaine entering the United States was going through the Pacific, not through the Caribbean. Of course, there is a problem in the Caribbean, but most of it was going to Mexico and crossing the border into the United States. I would also add that 80% or so of the drugs trafficked into the United States did not come from illegal aliens swimming across the Rio Grande. It came through the official checkpoints, through the major cities, in trucks, in cars, and in other ways. So I wanted to show this map and ask you your professional opinion. You've studied this for decades. What is going on at this point in terms of these trafficking routes?
Yeah, this is a fairly reliable picture shared by not only the UN program against drugs, but by basically all drug control agencies in the world. The European Union publish every year a report on the European market for narcotics, and the EU is the second largest market in the world, where all traffickers send and trade narcotics. And it says basically what the UN is saying. It never mentions Venezuela, mentions this route, that are the Pacific route for cocaine, and the Balkan routes for opium coming from Afghanistan. There is no mention of Venezuela. Even other countries that do their own narcotic reports and analysis every year, there is not a single country that says that Venezuela plays a significant role. Even the American sources, until 1 year ago or 2 years ago, there was no mention whatsoever of Venezuela as a major producers or dealer of narcotics, or Venezuelan officials linked to any significant organized crime organization, or that play a significant role in drug trafficking. This is a complete invasion by Mr. Rubio and Mr. Trump. All their own agencies do not corroborate this picture. And on the issue of political corruption and organized crime, there was in March this year a report by intelligence community, the U.S. intelligence community, that says that basically it's there is no whatsoever connection of high political figures in Venezuela and these strange names, Cartel do Sol and others, that are criminal organizations in Venezuela. These are not significant organizations. These are just a bunch of small criminals that do some local trafficking in something, and there was never, and there does not exist any connection with the political and with the government. There is a fight between the government and the organized crime in Venezuela, even involved in narcotics and so on. They do a quite decent job in fighting these issues, both organized crime and the drug trafficking. So there is not a small single piece of evidence in supporting this pretension. The issue, as we said before, is oil, not
Yeah.
narcotics. If narcotics would be an issue, they maybe could target Ecuador, who is now one of the main trafficking mediator between Latin America and Europe. But they don't talk about Ecuador. Even if in Europe there was a full ship, plenty of cocaine coming from Ecuador with a partnership in the ownership of this ship by the president, the current president of Ecuador, who is a maritime entrepreneur, controls basically the most important port in Venezuela.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence.
Not a single word on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a lot of evidence on Noboa, president of Ecuador, too.
And then they tried to involve Colombia in all this issue, but Colombia is a country that produces and traffic cocaine since more than 30, 40 years. Why now? They discovered suddenly that Colombia is, that the president of Colombia is directly involved, like Maduro and all the others. These are just pretext.
I've always thought, Professor Arlacchi, that if they really wanted to target the drug trade, the best thing to do would be to go after the banks in the City of London and in Wall Street that launder millions and billions of dollars of drug money. That is absolutely not touched. And
not only this, but American banks.
Yeah.
Miami is the center of money laundering.
Okay, good. I want to get into this issue because in what you've said, you've pretty well described the cover story that's being used around this. I want to get to the question of why, the real why behind this, and of course the issue of solutions, because I know you're a man of solutions that remains very active today in working on this problem. For those who are viewing this, this is an EIR interview with Professor Pino Arlacchi, the former director of the UNODC and a longtime and ongoing activist in the war against the drug trade. Maybe I shouldn't use the word war, but efforts to stop the drug trade. So what I would like to do, Professor Arlacchi, if I may, is to ask the question, okay, why? What's really behind this? And I want to mention two developments to you, if I may. One, in 2012, in Senate hearings in the United States, the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, chaired by Senator Levin, they issued a 335-page case history documenting in detail the role of many banks, but in particular, the London headquartered HSBC Bank, which you're familiar with, formerly Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, when it was based in Hong Kong, when Hong Kong was a British colony. Now it's HSBC. And they documented tens of billions of dollars, at least, of money laundering of money from the Sinaloa cartel. What happened next was interesting. In December of 2012, the United States Justice Department refused to prosecute HSBC, and they entered into a deferred prosecution agreement, what's known as a DPA. This was under Attorney General Eric Holder, and what he stated about why the Department of Justice would not be pressing charges against HSBC was that if this were done, it would provoke a crisis in the entire financial system. This became known as the Holder Doctrine, about why you can't touch these banks because the entire financial system is dependent on this money. This has been an issue raised by your successor, Antonio Maria Costa at the UNODC, by the Russia's former director of their anti-drug program, Viktor Ivanov. What is your view of this relationship between drug money laundering and the actual drug trade?
My view is that is a blatant exaggeration in saying that prosecuting HSBC, the entire financial system would collapse, so would be severely damaged. That's absolutely nonsense. There is a lot of money laundering. This is a very important international banks, and there would be no whatsoever risk of collapse of the entire financial system. It is a big bank, of course, and so on, but it's just a part, not particularly significant, of the entire issue of money laundering and the financial stability. Drug money goes through a process of money laundering and recycling, but is not the major component of international financial system. The major component of their dirty money is political corruption, but most of all is tax evasion by big multinational corporations and the issue of tax haven that is linked to it. So number one, illegal money, dirty money, is money laundering, is tax evasion by big corporations. Number two is corruption by political authorities. And number three is criminal money, mafia money. But in the political view, and also in the imagination of most people, is probably the opposite, the hierarchy between these three things. This is the first thing. The second is, along with the issue of oil, Venezuelan oil, which is a real issue at stake, there is also another issue, which is hiding the biggest drug problem that is in the United States, which is fentanyl consumption, is opioids consumption, which is really today a tragedy that is upsetting all figures on drug consumption all over the world. We have now this opioid boom that continues, that kills every year 100,000 Americans. That is an American issue, because this market of fentanyl and oxycodone and the similar anti-pain drugs was entirely created by pharmaceutical companies, American pharmaceutical companies, that legalized de facto narcotics in the United States.
Right.
This is organized crime, but no one would define organized crime in action like this. We have now in the United States almost 10 million people consuming fentanyl, oxycodone issue. That after the reaction of American institutions and people that sued this company quite successfully, they created a kind of a shortage of this pharmaceutical product in the market. And this shortage was filled by international organized crime. Mexican cartels learned how to produce fentanyl illegally, and now they sell it in the United States, but it is not the main supplier in the market. This is a very uncomfortable issue because it involves a very large population of the United States that is very sensitive to addiction.
Right.
Many former veteran soldiers that fought wars abroad that are now many millions in the United States. It's almost overall, they reach 6-7% of the population that are very sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely.
To get addicted. So no one wants to talk about it. So from time to time, New York Times does an investigation, but there is no proportion between the seriousness of this phenomenon and the political extension of it. No one cares about this issue. And so it's very, but it is a big issue. So it is much easier to say that we have opiates and cocaine problem. Much easier to say that the small amount of fentanyl coming from abroad comes from Mexico or even from China. They invented a diversion to hide this issue that is just American. In Europe, we do not have this fentanyl intoxication yet. And I am fairly confident that there will not be, because of issue of regulation, of the issue of even doctors in Europe and hospitals that do not share the view of American doctors and so on, that prescribe fentanyl, oxycodone, and similar.
Well, I certainly hope you're right about that, Professor Arlacchi. When one looks in depth behind this, one finds, in our view at EIR, and we've written a book on this called Dope Incorporated, that there is a large transnational, multinational, financial, and dirty money operation promoting the drug trade actively, a kind of new opium war. But the extent of this problem in the United States of fentanyl that you were mentioning, I think is, in one sense, even unknown to most Americans. The United Nations put out a report on this recently, and I'll just read a couple of statistics which give a horrifying picture of this. They report that 500,000 people died of drug-related deaths in 2019. Over the course of the entire 21st century to date, close to 10 million human beings have been lost to drugs. Based on that, the United Nations further calculates something that they call healthy life years lost due to drugs. And in 2019 alone, that translated into 18 million life years lost. Over the course of the 21st century, we have lost about 600 million potentially productive life years. So this gives some sense of the extent of the tragedy.
Look, the only historical precedence is China. China in 19th century got a mass intoxication that can be compared to what is happening today in the United States.
Right. Through the opium wars.
Yes, that intoxication ended drastically in just 3 years with the Chinese Revolution, and never came back.
Right.
But in the United States, as you say, there's no awareness of that because there is a lack of basic information about it. There's no political discussion on it. And it's a tragedy that is destroying an entire sector of the American population, which is already degraded, it is already almost physically destroyed. The degradation, the physical degradation of part of the American population, the poorest, or the marginals, the veterans, is a huge problem without any similar, any possibility to compare it in other countries.
Question. Is legalization a solution?
It's the American case that shows that there is no solution. It's not a solution because the most powerful drugs are these opiates. Fentanyl is 30, 50 times more powerful and dangerous than heroin. And now it's basically legal in the United States. Not today, but since 10 years, it was not a crime to produce or traffic or sell or use fentanyl, the opiates. So it's illegal. It's a legal drug, sold regularly and so on. What was the result? 10 million people addicted, and the numbers that you just quoted, the biggest intoxication for narcotics in the history, which are entirely legal.
Yeah.
So I never been a prohibitionist. I always thought that we have to deal with drug demand, drug reduction policies, and so on. Even distributing heroin not freely, but under medical control to the people. We have methadone, which is a drug that is regularly distributed in Europe and also the United States to people under medical control, and other measures, and drug policies that have been effective in Europe today. We have half the addicts that we got 15 years ago, half of it. And in some countries, they are rapidly decreasing and almost disappearing. There are now old people, old in the sense that are more than 40 years old in most European countries, and there is no attraction by narcotics to new generation. So this patient, long-term demand control policies worked in Europe. No country in Europe you have a serious problem of heroin addiction anymore. There is the risk now of opiates coming from the United States. This pain reduction medicine.
Yeah. These are hydrocodone, OxyContin.
But fortunately, up to now, even because of the American example, there are no tendencies to have a new European market like it occurred with the cocaine 30 years ago, in which it started in the United States and then extended to Europe. For the moment, we do not have this risk.
Right. Well, my final question has to do with what do we do? How do we deal with this? I want to just to bolster what you were saying about how legalization doesn't work. This is a graphic which we produced again back in 2019. This is the case of marijuana, but I think the case applies across the board to all the drugs. When you lower the price, and in part by legalization and so on, the result is you increase the quantity produced and consumed. And I graphed this against the political policy of first decriminalization in the 80s and 90s, then medical use, and now full recreational legalization. And of course, what's happened is it's gone up and up and up. It doesn't solve the problem. Now, many people say, Professor Arlacchi, well, nothing can be done. There is one graph which I know you are very familiar with, since you did this or were involved in doing this with the government of Afghanistan and are still involved in this. But for those who say it can't be done, this is a graph that you're seeing on the screen here of the trajectory of let me get the exact units that we used here. It's a familiar graph. This is tons of production of opium equivalent. Sometimes heroin, sometimes opium. And of course, Afghanistan has historically been the primary producer. And you see this incredible drop in this 2000-2001 period, down to zero from Afghanistan. This
Yes,
kind
I
of
did that.
this kind of disproves the argument that says, well, you can't do anything about it. You may as well surrender. You were involved. How was it done? And what do you suggest be done today?
In when I joined the United Nations, I started to work on the production of opium. That at that time was the main issue for European consumers, addicts, and so on. 95%, and even today, of European opium comes from Afghanistan. And I was struck by the fact that in Afghanistan, opium production was, in economic terms, quite small. It was a very small phenomenon. Was just a couple of tens of $1 million. So strategically, it was much better and much more effective to try to end up with the production of opium in Afghanistan, which was extracted by poppy cultivation.
Mm-hmm.
So I mobilized the resources of the United Nations and also the member states who contributed to it in order to create alternative productions to opium. The Taliban at the time were in power, just arrived in power, and I used stick and carrot policy with them, convincing them that the international community could provide the resources, alternative resources to create alternative to the opium cultivation. They initially balked a bit, they tried, then I used stronger arguments until in the year 2001, first of all, we obliged them prohibit the cultivation of opium poppy, promising them alternative resources, money. It was at that time around can seem very small, but with $200 million a year for 5 years, we could completely phase out the production of opium poppy in Afghanistan. I mean, a market that in Europe was almost $50 billion. Mm-hmm. First, we prohibited the production. We wrote the opium ban for the government of Afghanistan, but for the Taliban. And at a certain point, after 2 years, they really implemented it. They prohibited the cultivation effectively. So there was no cultivation of opium poppy in the year 2001 in Afghanistan. 95 reduction. But the same year, October of that year, Afghanistan was invaded by USA. And the first thing that Mr. Rumsfeld did personally is to make a set of agreements with the warlords of Afghanistan who controlled the production of narcotics, telling them that the USA would turn its head the other way around in exchange of their support in the fight, the so-called fight against terrorism, which was a terrorism managed by the same people of the agreement. So the following year, production skyrocketed all over Afghanistan. And then during American occupation, no one cared about the elimination of opium cultivation. So they continued, Afghanistan farmers and traffickers, to poison Europe, particularly. The United States was much less affected because heroin in the United States came from Southeast Asia, came from Myanmar. Mm-hmm. And so there was no particular caring about it. But in Europe was a huge problem. 20 years, the Americans retire, abandon Afghanistan. Taliban are again there.
Mm-hmm.
And since more than 2 years now, the Taliban are effectively prohibiting cultivation. They asked me help for this issue. And I realized that they are, again, very serious in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But now I don't agree with them because they are doing it anyway without offering any alternative to the peasants that produce a commodity that is 10 times more rentable than any other. Mm-hmm. And now we are seeing in Europe the first signal of a big heroin shortage. But this is occurring 2 years later because there are huge holder place where they put the heroin before selling it. So this deposit, huge deposits of heroin now are being rapidly depleted. And we could soon have in Europe a huge problem of heroin shortage that would potentially affect 1 million of residual consumers.
Right.
This could create an opportunity for opioids coming from the United States to fill the gap. But as I said before, this is not granted. It's not granted because the work we did against drug consumption in the last decades has been effective. There is a huge awareness in Europe about it, and there are no complicity by European doctors that do not prescribe so easily anti-pain drugs like in the United States. This is, in few words, the situation.
No, it's decades of experience. It's hard to summarize in just a few minutes. I appreciate that. I do think that the example of Afghanistan and what was done around the turn of the century is a kind of proof of principle that with the proper restraint methods, but especially with economic development, you can actually address the problem.
Absolutely.
It's a little bit like what Pope Paul VI said about development is the new name of peace. Again, development is the only competent way to fight the international drug trade. As you're probably aware, the Schiller Institute and Executive Intelligence Review have long promoted the idea, for example, for Mexico and Central America, that there should be great development projects to help the peasantry in those regions develop, have high-speed rail, have production, and to address the needs of the population that are otherwise driven into nothing but the drug trade. Same thing for Africa, for Europe, and so on and so forth. So these kinds of great projects become of some significance. So I think that your experience in Afghanistan is a microcosm of what should be a global approach of development as the solution to the drug problem. Is that a fair evaluation?
Absolutely. I believe that we demonstrated that it is possible to put aside, to eliminate the issue of natural drugs, issue that has been on the table for 1 century. We can do it. We can do it, and we can be entirely successful. But when pharmaceutical industry filled the gap, heroin consumption, for instance, even in the United States, was on the point to be quite marginal, decreased a lot when fentanyl entered on the scene. But this was the normal industry, normal capitalism that took the opportunity to make huge profits on that. So we have the tools to understand the situation. And we have potentially the tools to reduce to a bare minimum or to almost eliminate this issue, there are also, of course, it's a fight that never ends because there are also alternative way to skip the reality, even without the use of chemicals and natural drugs. And maybe in the future, this will be the biggest challenge, the creation of alternative worlds that entirely virtual. But I mean, one problem at the time. And our experience in fighting natural drugs is not so negative like many people say.
Right. The before we actually conclude, and I will ask you for any closing thoughts that you might care to share with the audience of EIR, I would ask our viewers to subscribe to this channel, to like this show, to share it around, and go to EIR.news to purchase subscriptions, $10 a month for the subscription to the Daily Alert, $50 per month for the full services, including extraordinary interviews like what we're having right now with Professor Arlacchi, which are simply not available in other places. Your final
True.
thoughts? Anything? Yeah, go right ahead. Your final thoughts.
No, I say these problems are created by us, by human beings, and there are no human problems that cannot be solved by human people themselves. This is an old story, an old saying that by Antonio Gramsci that I share entirely.
I share your optimism. I think this can be done. I really appreciate that sense that we have the tools, as you said. We can, in large measure, eliminate drugs. And I think that sense of optimism about solving the world's problems as a whole is what's most urgently needed to actually make sure that those problems are solved. If one starts from pessimism and a sense of no can do, then we will ultimately be defeated. But if we approach it with a scientific sense, with a sense of commitment to humanity, and with a sense that this can be done, we can, I am convinced, at long last, finally win the opium war, which was unfortunately only suspended for a period of decades and centuries. Professor
Just to
Arlacchi?
conclude with another very famous Gramsci saying, we must have the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will if we want to overcome this problem, which is a drug problem, it's a big problem, important problem, but there are bigger issues that have been faced and solved. But this can do that in another interview. Like China, for instance, got rid of poverty, which is an issue that is 10 times bigger than narcotics. They had the pessimism of intellect. They did plans, extremely effective and detailed, and they, in 40 years, got rid of poverty in the country, which is a much, much bigger problem than drug consumption and trafficking.
Absolutely. 850 million people over 40 years, down to zero.
Down to
Two-thirds
zero.
two-thirds of the world's elimination of extreme poverty came from China. The entire world owes China a debt of gratitude because this affects the entire world economy in a positive way.
And no one thought it was possible to do. No one
Exactly.
thought
Okay, so
that.
we have the theme for our next interview. I, I accept your invitation for us to invite you to come back. I appreciate your participating in this, your support for EIR, and we look forward to talking to you again. Thank you very much, Professor
Thank
Arlacchi.
you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.